Chapter 9, The Blizzard. When it is bright, sunshiny weather, the cold out west is not so penetrating, at least by day, but at night it eats into the very bones. There were long evenings of hard, dry cold, and occasionally a flurry of snow, when Raquel sat opposite Georgie and prodded him on to his lessons. They had had no more letters from Dad and the boys. Mom, silent and undemanding, spent her time in little services for Raquel and Georgie. The great house was never overly clean, nor even tidy, except for the kitchen. There had been so much drudgery, and Mom was one of the army of Western women who grow weary of struggling against the ceaseless invasion of desert, dust even into the top shelves of the closets. Take it easy, honey. When spring comes on, there'll be plenty of hard work for you. Just wait till this cold weather breaks. But it did not break. One afternoon in late January, after a day of dark skies, it started to snow in great whirling flakes. By night, it was blowing a blizzard, sweeping unbroken across the mesas, with a strength that seemed to gather force with every mile, until it hurled itself in fury against the steeps of the mountains at their back. Well, if we don't lose us a bunch of steers tonight, this snow'll save the grass meb. Russell, melting off before the fire, slapped the backs of his hands to bring the blood. He began to warble. Oh, I am a Texas cowboy, far away from home. If ever I get back to Texas, I never more will roam. Montana is too cold for me, and the winters are too long. He was unfortunately interrupted by Georgie, who burst in with the message that Alina's little girls were both sick, and Pancho and Alina wanted Mom and Raquel to please come down there. I'll go. Raquel was already slipping into her sheepskin jacket, and she ran out the door calling back, If you're needed, Mom, I'll come back up or send for what's wanted. Come on, Tooth, pronto. Out through the frozen patio she ran, and as she squeezed through the snow-blocked gate, a cutting gale fairly snatched the breath from her lips. Alternately racing before the wind and stumbling head down against it, she and Georgie made downhill. Blown half the distance in a few minutes, they scrambled and stumbled against the wind the rest of the way for 10 or 15 minutes more. In the little low adobe at the foot of the corral, 10-year-old Josefita sat shaking before the fire, torn by one chill after another. On a pallet against the wall, a 4-year-old baby, tiny Luisita, lay with glazed eyes, her lips drawn back pitifully from teeth and gums. Fragile little fingers plucked at the coverlet. How long has she been like this? Raquel asked sharply, a sick feeling clutching her throat. All day, señorita, Alina barely whispered, appeal and agony in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us before? Raquel stopped at Alina's pitiful face. Oiga, she said in Spanish, listen. My mother will have to try to come down. I will go to Red Dog for the doctor. Take that grease, there on the stove, warm it at once and put it on Josefita's chest and throat with this flannel over it. Make her a hot drink of your mezcal water and sugar, Pancho. Put her feet in hot water, wrap her in a hot blanket. It was so they treated sick creatures in the ranch kitchen. But the baby, Luisita. This baby, you should have no good to scold that poor mother. It looked too late now. She had seen sick lambs so, but this was beyond her skill. It seemed madness to go out in such a storm. But the Pathfinder had never failed them yet. And within 20 minutes they had started, Jami and she, bundled and gloved and mittened, the Pathfinder's powerful lights searching through driving snow that swirled and sifted between the closed storm curtains, until she and Jami looked like two snow figures. Pushing, plowing, slipping, skidding ahead, stopping they went, Raquel's hands stiff, glued to the wheel, and they had been gone only 20 minutes. and back there a baby lay gasping for its life. "Not through the pasture yet," shouted Jami. But at length they made the upper gate, and, once on the slopes, with a clean-swept, frozen road beneath the wheels, the car seemed to take the gale between its teeth as it roared swift and straight up to the pass. The blast that struck them as they reached the top made the ascent seem like balmy weather. Tears of pain from the cold rolled down Raquel's face and froze there, and for a moment she had to release the wheel to Jami, who would all too willingly have driven the whole way. The descent on the other side was made rapidly and fairly easily. They seemed to aeroplane down through bitter Arctic spaces, but when they came to enter the tiny mining town, drifts mounted, choking, smothering them. The engine labored, roared like a baffled giant, and only when it had been fed with the thermos flask of hot coffee did it gather itself together and plow up over the freezing masses of snow. They stood at length within Doc Merrick's house. He pulled them toward a leaping fire. The clock on the mantel showed 10, nearly an hour and a half since Raquel had looked down at the sick child in Esquibel's house. "Esquibel's baby, Doc. It looks like pneumonia. I'm afraid she's dying, and it took so long to come." Doc Merrick, tall, splendidly broad and bronzed, lived at the pass through the grace of God and the rare air of the mountain top, with 1 active lung, 2 active dogs, and 3 inactive servants. Already he was buttoning his coat with one hand, while he handed Raquel a cup of hot coffee with the other. And then, with 2 hot water bottles for the Pathfinder, they were outside again. And they had need of the hot water, for the force of the wind broke the momentum of the long coast from the pass, and they reached the arroyo without any speed and a cold engine. They had to stop, to back, and to rush at the heavy drifts that had piled up. It seemed an eternity until the car plowed up to its own shed and slid in. When they reached the casita, the doctor went from one cot to the other and then set to work over wee Luisita. Raquel and Mom, who had come without being summoned, were at his elbow. Alina and Pancho were thrust into the next room, where Panchito slept safely. If once Alina's volcanic weeping were to start, it would be beyond control. It was 7 o'clock in the morning when the doctor beckoned Raquel outside. Mrs. Daniels had gone home about dawn. Inside, the 2 little girls slept quietly. With every care, they would recover. The world was one glittering expanse of snow, gleaming whiteness stretching everywhere, clear and cold, and quiet under a dazzling sun. The mountains looked like a frosted Christmas card. Raquel was tired. Even her youthful face was drawn in that searching light. Well, young lady, you mustn't look so sad. Think of what you have accomplished in the last 12 hours. Come, a little breakfast will fix you up," and Dr. Merrick put a hand under her elbow. "What's that you've got there?" "Just a branding iron." Raquel lifted the heavy bar. In the snow at her feet, a large letter H was cut diagonally. She rubbed it out with her boot, and shouldering the iron walked up the hill with the doctor. So Pancho was the rustler, living right here on Dad's land. She had noticed the iron in a corner back of the kitchen stove, as she sat tending the fire and boiling water during the night. Well, at any rate, Pancho cared enough about his babies to have forgotten such incriminating evidence. He had left it right out where it could be seen. Ordinarily, such a discovery would have driven any ranch owner wild. But now, somehow, the struggle for the children's lives during the night had made other things seem unimportant. As she passed the bunkhouse, Russ and Jami came out. "We're startin' out to see how the steers on the mesa stood the storm." Russ looked at the boss for confirmation, and Raquel nodded. Russ, did you ever see any lazy L white faces, or cattle that looked like Rancho's white faces, branded like this? She held up the iron. About a month ago, George, and I found a heifer at the spring below La Balsa. It was one that I had branded last summer and was burned over like this. Russ swore a round range oath. Beg your pardon, ma'am, but, and he sputtered. Don't say a word, Russ. I found it in Pancho's cabin this morning. Wait till the little girls are well, and we'll fire him clean off Lowe's ranchos. Dad always said he was mean, but never thought that he would steal. After breakfast, Raquel slipped into her icy room, crept between blankets that Mom had warmed in the kitchen, and slept for 6 hours. She woke refreshed, so invigorated by the bracing air that she did not feel the exertion of the night before at all. Georgie was in the kitchen, on his knees behind the stove, where he had a pair of twin lambs, poor little early offspring that Russ had rescued from a snow drift. Their mother's body over them had saved them from her fate. Mom and Georgie had poured warm milk from a spoon down their throats, and the little pink noses were beginning to quiver with returning life. They made awkward movements in their soft nest and blindly adopted the nursing bottle for their mother. The blizzard took heavy toll over all that part of the state. But Lowe's ranchos suffered less than most ranges because the cattle were in excellent shape and better able to weather such exposure. The wisdom of Mr. Daniels in acquiring the new piece of range was shown, for the cattle had had fresh grazing for a month before the blizzard. Also, that tract of land happened to be protected from northerly winds and ranged up into the foothills where there were many sheltering canyons. Raquel, Pancho Esquibel, Angel, Russ, and Jami, in a week's time covered all the lowlands and found not more than 20 casualties. We'll have no trouble rounding up our 1,000 head, or more, Russell told her. They were in the middle of February then. One day the cold weather was gone. The sun shone with surprising heat. The roads were dried up. Raquel drove into town for the mail. She had not been in for a month, although someone went for the mail every week. There was a big packet, but Raquel did not open it after she saw a letter to her mother on top. She turned and flew straight back to the ranch. Mom was in the kitchen with the lambs, now frisking blithely in the life-giving sunshine that poured through the door. The 2 other little lambs of the blizzard night, Luisita and Josefita, more languid but not so white, played beside them. You read it, Raquel. Mom's hand shook as she held out the letter. Dad had made his second trip over on cattle transports. Both times they had narrowly escaped being attacked by submarines, and Dad was full of the stupidities of some folks when it came to handling cattle. I don't blame the poor critters none for being seasick, wrote Dad, and I wished for Raquel many a time to help me try to quiet them with that way she has when they get frightened. Now, Raquel, as soon as you meet the note, deliver the government as many steers as you can as soon as possible. You'll be getting a request sometime this spring, so be ready. These boys have to eat if we're going to win this war. Why, I talked with a soldier that said he hadn't had anything but fudge for a week. At that, Raquel laughed until she was weak. But the letter had stirred her seriously, with a passionate desire for action. The winter seemed as if it would never end. But now, the time was coming for which they had been waiting. In 2 weeks, they would begin to pick out their cattle for shipment. Now the real test for her was at hand. She felt somehow that it was going to be a test, that unforeseen obstacles were waiting. But if other women and girls were taking the place of men all over the country, doing things that they never had done before, she, Raquel Daniels, brought up on the range, used to handling cattle all her life, would be pretty good for nothing if she couldn't do her bit. And then she opened the letters from Anne and Miss Carter, which came in the same packet. "We have not forgotten you here at the Towers," wrote Miss Hetty. "The mistletoe is still green, and so is your memory. I see that the government is counting greatly on its western ranches for war supplies, and I envy you your chance to help." That was nice of Miss Carter to write her. But my, how far away school seemed now. She could think only of the spring roundup and the cattle to be shipped from Lowe's ranchos. Anne's letter, however, read aloud to Mom, roused vivid and affectionate memories. Anne loved the Indian necklace and the mistletoe, which furnished kisses to lots of parting sweethearts at a big party we gave here New Year's night. "Did you get the books, darlin', and the other things? The etching was from Bari, you know. He sailed last week. Didn't you answer Anne's letter yet, honey, Mrs. Daniels looked up in reproof. "Of course I did, Mother, the next week. Tooth took it in for me." Georgie had risen stealthily and was creeping from the room. Raquel overtook him at a stride, caught his woolly collar, and from the crummy recesses of an inner pocket of his sheepskin jacket drew forth her 6 weeks old letter to Anne. She cuffed him and returned to Anne's letter, feeling a strange disappointment that Bari should have gone overseas without having had her thanks, without having read her letter to the family at least, for she had been too shy, too provincial, Lois would have said, to thank Bari herself. "The girls at school write," Anne concluded her letter, "that no one has heard a word from Lois Wainwright since the first few postcards she sent from El Paso. I wonder where she is and why she doesn't write. I understand that Miss Carter has suggested to your Jimmy that if Lois, Father, does not recover, she return to school where she can be among old friends. Mr. Wainwright's lawyers in Boston haven't even heard from him and have no idea where he is, as he had said he might go to California or to the Orient. Did you know that they were in El Paso for some time after you returned home?" Raquel sat motionless. She felt vaguely covered with a sense of great wrongdoing. Just what it was, she did not at first seem to see clearly. Oh, yes, she should have told Jimmy, for then he would have found out where Lois and her father were. He could have seen them while he was stationed so near El Paso. He had been only a few miles away all the time. Never before in her life had Raquel suffered such a sense of sick shame as came to her then. Once, when she was 8 years old, she had stood by and watched her pet coon suck a dozen of Mom's imported white leghorn eggs, which she had put under a setting hen the day before. Raquel felt now somewhat as she had after that performance. Russell was standing in the door waiting for Raquel to look up from the letter, at which she had been staring for so long. "Could I speak to you a moment, alone?" He jerked his head towards the storeroom. "Now, this here Pancho," he began when the door was closed behind them. "This here Pancho, it's time to vamoose him. Roundup's common on, and if he thinks we ain't on to him, he'll try some more of this cattle Brandon business, and if he does, I'm liable to fill him full o' lead. I recommend that we have a understandin' with him, now that the little gals is well agin, and that you as boss of the Lazy L backs me as foreman and ridin' boss and fires him." "Yes," assented Raquel dully. "Yes. It's only fair to Dad." The interview in the saddle shed was not a happy affair. Pancho, suave, confident, plausible with a trace of insolence, could explain everything. The branding iron had been found on the range the day before, was brought home, and on account of the illness of the muchachitas, had been forgotten. That was why he had not mentioned it at the time. "But why not since?" asked Raquel. Esquibel quivered with righteous anger. What? They doubted him. Never before had the word of an esquibble what should a stray branding iron matter. Nothing much except that practically all of the brands in this part of the country are well known, Raquel replied. As you know, and this seems to be a new one. And as you also probably know, it has been used over the lazy L. In fact, it covers it very nicely. At that Pancho esquibble started involuntarily. You do not mean you suspect me of stealing cattle? Forget that stuff, Pancho, advised Russell coldly. What proof you got that this isn't your doin', S? What proof have you it is? Esquibble shot back, while Raquel waved away the discussion with an impatient hand. Oiga, Pancho. It may be as you say. But the matter of the gas you sold does not look very well for you. It seems that Senor Daniels had told him to sell the gas when anyone needed it, and that he could either turn over the money or have it taken out of his wages. There were the cans. The padroncita could count up just what had been sold if she wished to deduct it. Raquel hardly knew what to do. She shared with her family the sentiment for Alina and the children. Pancho was a valuable hand, and it would be difficult to handle the roundup without him. The chances were he'd stay, put for a while anyway. Well, Pancho, I don't want to be unfair, and we'll wait till Dad comes home before we carry out that firing sentence. We'll see what rebranded cattle come to light in the spring roundup. Esquibble bowed, and without a glance at Russell turned on his heel. We'd better have turned him off. That's a snake meaner'n a rattler. He gives no warnin'. Dear Jimmy, Raquel started her letter off bravely that night. But after 2 hours of struggle, she folded what she had written and sealed it quickly within an envelope. It had been hard, and she ended by telling him plainly, I did a very mean, crooked thing. I knew Lois was in the West with her father. She left school when I did. But I didn't tell you, because I guess I didn't want you to go to see her. She didn't care for me at school, and we were not roommates after all. I certainly didn't love her, and that's the truth. But I should have told you, and then you could have looked them up while you were at Fort Bliss. I heard from Anne Marvin that no one knows where they are just now. But I suppose you'll see them on their way back, and maybe you've heard from them yourself by now. Well, I suppose you will be awfully disappointed in me, Jimmy. I guess I'm mean and vindictive no good as ever. Raquel Daniels. P.S. She's prettier than ever. Chapter 10. That D.A.N.I.L.S. gal. Tomorrow's the great day, Mother Daniels. We begin roundin' up. 4 weeks isn't too much time. February found the winds still sharp, as they blew down from frozen drifts on high slopes and in the shade of deep canyons. But the sun of midday was warm, and the ground was as dry as if it had not been covered with snow 2 weeks before. 3 weeks of exhausting riding made the roundup nearly complete. It had meant hard work for the 6 cowhands, bringing the cattle together by 1s, 2s, 6s, out of canyons, off the open range, up on the slopes, and driving them down steadily toward the big fenced corral that lay 10 miles from the house. Ole Hossfoot had come down to help, and chose to ride night herd with Russ. Esquibble worked so faithfully and efficiently that Raquel's suspicions were allayed, and she was ready to forgive him almost anything when he cut out 50 head of steers from a big bunch of yearlings and cows that were to calve that spring, and did it all in the space of a day's marvelous riding. The cattle were in surprisingly good shape, clean, rangy, well-grown. It's a beautiful breed, that Whiteface, said Raquel to Ole Hossfoot. He assented, that red color's nice. But to tell the truth, I can't see nothin' beautiful in a cow. Can't seem to get enthusiastic over 'em none. Take a hoss now. And he was off, expatiating on the beauties of the wild horses that had been breeding over north, come down from Colorado, Montana, Nebraska. Soon's this roundup's over, that's where I'm going to get a new horse, Raquel decided, fired by his descriptions. During the first week of the roundup, Raquel returned to the ranch house to sleep. But as the outfit worked farther away from home at the beginning of the second week, she rode up with a pack on her pony to the door of the Raquelita, the roundup ranchito 20 miles from the house, where the boys were now bunking. From the dust that followed her emerged the Ford, driven by Jami, with Mrs. Peavy and Lena in the back seat. "Here you, Russ. Mom says to eat these dried fruits, or you'll never get over those boils." And she threw a sack of provisions on the floor. "We're going to live high now, with Ms. Peavy and Lena to cook for us." During the first week of the cow working, Raquel had telegraphed a commission firm in Kansas City that she could ship 1,000 head of cattle by March 1st. She then advised the railroad office at El Paso to have cars ready for her by that day. She found, however, that it would be impossible to get any cars at all until March 15th, as both Arizona and New Mexico ranches were shipping. She went all the way into La Cruz to call the freight agent at El Paso on the long-distance telephone, and he assured her that he would do all in his power to get her cars earlier, but that she should surely have them not later than March 15th. So she notified Kansas City of the change, and not waiting to hear from them, returned to the range. It seemed then as if the extension of time had been providential, for every kind of upset and delay descended on them. Twice there were stampedes at night when the animals were spooked by no one knew what. One night a bunch of 3-year-olds carried away corral and wire fence and fled into the hills, and they had to be pursued and brought together all over again. The overworked cowponies had to be reinforced by a half-dozen fresh horses from the big house. Russ rode night herd, falling asleep in the saddle. Had it not been for Ole Hossfoot's vigilance and his stories that kept up their spirits, they could not have brought the herd together again in so short a time. At length 1,200 head were rounded up from the plain, and from canyon and basin, where they were hiding. Early the next morning, they were to be driven over to the ranch corrals. A circle of soapweed flares was lit. As fast as one burned down, someone would touch a match to another. The leaping flames warmed the sharp air and signaled Mom, 15 miles away, that all was well. They lit up a sea of white faces and kept away those sinister, lurking dog shapes that prowled in wide circles about the outfit. Georgie slept, toasting his soaking feet by a bed of dying coals. Raquel drowsed near. Good fortune seemed to be with her, for there was no stampeding, no restlessness. Between 11 o'clock and midnight, as was their habit, the cows got up to graze a bit on the grass which lay beneath their feet. They swallowed it unchewed, turned around, and lay down again amidst a gentle stirring and rumbling. With a prayer in her heart for no more mishaps, Raquel slept the dreamless sleep of weary muscles and the boundless, pure air of the prairie. 5 or 6 hours later, just as it was growing light, she woke to hear the milling about of the cattle, the mooing, and the call for fresh feeding grounds. That night found them within 4 miles of the house, so Raquel rode on to El Rancho, as the boys would have the stock safely corralled before noon next day. March 15th was still 2 days away. But the next day at La Cruz, Raquel was to learn that business was not accomplished merely by giving orders, sending telegrams, securing promises. "No cars available for the 15th," was the message she got over the telephone from the El Paso freight agent. There was no further word from the Kansas City commission firm, so she hurried back to Los Ranchos to advise with Russ. The first time I've had my feet under a table in more than 2 weeks, she said as she sat at lunch with Mom. The sound of a car was heard outside. Panchito came in to say that un caballero wished to see the padroncita. Raquel went out to find a sporty-looking gentleman in a plaid ulster sitting in a rented car. He jumped out and introduced himself as buyer for the Kansas City firm with which she was dealing. Was in El Paso, Miss Daniels. Am buying to supply the government. Just thought I'd run up here and see you personally in regard to your wire. He showed her a copy of her telegram to his firm. Feeders would bring only $35 on the hoof, he said. Feeders, as all cattle country folks know, are cattle shipped straight from the range to be fed up by the packing companies on corn cakes and hay, until their meat is hardened and fit for market. Raquel was disturbed and disappointed, but quickly calculated that as they had brought in 200 extra head, they could ship every animal, make enough to meet all expenses, and still have $40,000 clear. That would take care of the note, the option, and the interest. But I can't get cars until after the 15th anyway, she told him. Oh, I think I could swing that for you, miss, he replied easily. If you'll just say the word on this deal and close right now, I think we can manage to have those cars on the 15th. Caution made her refuse to close any deal until she had thought it over and could make other inquiries. She agreed to meet him in La Cruz 2 days later. Turning to the stock page of her paper that evening, she found feeders quoted at $55 a head for the coming week. The rise in beef that took place during the war, and that later was to bring every head of stock to $75 and $90 on the hoof, had begun. Raquel was amazed. She sent Georgie riding in to La Cruz the first thing next morning to telegraph inquiry to Kansas City and to wire El Paso about her cattle cars again. He was to wait until 3 for the answers. Georgie returned at 4, and Raquel, who had been down at the shipping pen ever since he had left that morning, met him at the big gate. She seized the message he held out. It was from the El Paso freight agent, stating that he could not let her have any cars until after April 1st. On account of the war, all transportation was congested, and every available inch of space had been tied up by orders from up above. Raquel's fighting blood rose. She had felt all along that there was something up. A. B is back of this, she said with tightened lips. He's in Kansas City, sis, Georgie told her. I heard him saying over to Red Dog. Shipped round March 1st along with his cattle. Well, I'll go down to town and see why I can't get my cars when I ordered them a month ahead of time. It was unthinkable. She must have accommodations. What if she should mismanage things fail? She shook such a thought away from her. Surely the freight office and the commission man were not trying to take advantage of her just because she was a girl. Wait till tomorrow. A glorious day dawned, and the old car did not ease up on 60 miles an hour until they reached La Cruz. Raquel was not thinking of stone-bruised tires now. She got El Paso on the telephone. Mr. Massey, we've done business with your road for years. What is the matter about our cattle cars? Is that true? Why is it impossible to let us have them? Miss Daniels. I can't say ma'am. It seems queer, I know. I had the reservations for you for March 15th all right. Then I got orders clearing the way for shipments for A. B mares. Then 2 Arizona ranches were set ahead by orders from up above to March 15th, that date given you. Unless you can get at it from higher up, that's final, I'm afraid. He spoke regretfully, for Mr. Daniels and Lowe's ranchos were popular. Raquel came out of the booth fighting mad. Yet her heart was sick, for she felt in this mix-up something that was not quite straight business. What must she do? She was to see the shift commission man at 2:30. He would return to El Paso at 4:30. She might have to take his offer rather than have any slip up. With half a mind to go down to El Paso herself, she put off the decision till after 3. She went into the post office and collected her mail, hoping to find some inspiration there. Among the papers was a letter from Jimmy. "By the time you have this," he wrote, "Raquel, my dear, I shall be back at Fort Bliss. Won't that be great? Being just outside El Paso, I'll be able to get in there fairly often. Why can't you come down for a bit of fun? I'm dying to go to a movie. Quick." Back to the telegraph office she flew. A message was soon speeding over the wires to Lieutenant James Hovey, Fort Bliss. "What's holding back my cars?" was the query. "See what you can do for us, and wire if it will do any good for me to come down." While she waited for an answer, she took Mom to lunch and afterwards wired another Kansas City firm. She sent the message to an old friend of her father, Edward Lyle by name. A prompt reply came whizzing back from Kansas City. At 2:00, as she leaned over the telegraph counter, the following message was handed her. "Cannot offer market price for government supply feeders, but $50 a head on delivery and $75 for fattened cattle of lazy L grade. Edward Lyle." What an offer. With a whoop of joy, Raquel rushed out across the street to the car where she had left Mom with her bundles. "Thought the bottom had dropped out of the cattle business, Mom, but it's okay. Still, just let me meet this note, and the government can have all we make above expenses afterwards. There's something wrong somewhere, though. I don't know what or why, but I figure A. B's got something to do with it. Now if Jimmy can just get us some cars." At 2:30 exactly, in the lobby of the dingy little hotel, Emporio Magnifico, she informed the commission agent that she could not close with him on his terms. "Well, miss," he replied angrily, "have your own way. But I could get you your cars, and you'd have a quick turnover. Which is better? 35,000 in hand when you want it, or delay? I tell you straight, my girl, you'll find it a pretty hard job gettin' any transportation at all for the next 2 months without some kind of pull." "I know, all right. That's my problem," Raquel came back. "But I'm not selling my father's cattle for $15 less than I can get. I'll tell you good day, sir," and she left him standing there. But out on the street, her elation faded, as she recalled suddenly that now more than ever she must have cars. Would Jimmy be able to do anything for her? He had not mentioned her letter, nor Lois. Maybe he hadn't received it. Well, he would do all he could for Dad's sake anyway. And dismissing her fears with a shake of the head, she crossed the street again and went into the bank. Everyone in town knew Raquel Daniels, and she knew everyone. But today she missed many a pleasant smile and deprived several ready youths of the opportunity of lifting their sombreros. In the sanctum of the president, back of a little door marked "Private," she shook hands with a rotund little man whose nervous manner was in strange contrast to her own quiet air. "It's about the note and the interest, mister." "Putney," she said, thinking to herself, "My, he's afraid of something else now his new directors, probably A. B, yes, yes. Not due for 2 weeks, my dear Miss Raquel, Mr. Putney had never forgotten his Eastern manners. "No, sir. I was just going to say, I'll meet it on time. But I was just wondering if there were any slip-up in getting my cattle cars on time, if I could get a few days' extension. Mr. Putney looked worried. I trust such a thing won't happen. It would be most unfortunate. Miss Raquel, indeed, even for a stockholder of your father's assets. For the new directors have intimated that no extension would be considered. Raquel was looking quite as self-possessed when she walked out of the bank as she had when she walked in, but within her breast was a turmoil. Back to the telegraph office she went. Eagerly, she tore open the yellow envelope that was eventually handed across the counter. "Don't worry," it ran. "We'll find out what's what and get some action. Can't get away just now, but we'll come up first chance. Jimmy." Raquel felt suddenly that it was surely mighty nice to have some man folks to stand up for you and help you out sometimes. Leaving word with the operator to have any further messages telephoned to Red Dog, she turned the nose of her car out on the sandy mesa that rose gently to the foot of her purpling mountains. She would need 5 days to move in before April 1st. 2 to get the cattle into the railroad, 2 for transit, 1 for immediate payment. She had 4 days' grace. Why had she trusted anyone? Engrossed with her thoughts, and with the mechanical necessity of driving, she did not speak until the little lighted casitas of Red Dog shone ahead. With their friendly twinkle, a light of inspiration seemed to penetrate the problem in Raquel's mind. Her next move was all at once clear. But she'd take no one into her confidence. She'd do like Dad. For all he seemed to talk so much and so openly of his affairs, when you stopped to think it over, he never did really tell anybody anything they couldn't find out for themselves. When she looked back on the days that followed, they seemed like a dream of tense waiting, and daily trips from the big corral over to Red Dog or La Cruz to find the occasional hopeful bulletins from Jimmy. Then, on the night of the 25th, a ranger brought word that a Mr. Hovey was calling her from El Paso. She drove into Red Dog to talk to him over the telephone. "Drive your cattle down tomorrow. There will be cars for 1,200 head at the La Cruz yards between 6 and 7 tomorrow morning. Don't ask how I did it. Just pull that may not last more than 24 hours. We'll be up next week." Jimmy's faraway voice ended in a satisfied chuckle. At dawn, with the bells of Los Ranchos tolling, all hands went down to the big pens. The cattle had been resting and fattening for the past 10 days inside a half-mile fence. There was some pretty riding and roping, and some fancy cow work as they were herded up for the drive down to the yards at La Cruz. The hardest part of the drive was getting them up to the pass and over it. But they made it by 4 that afternoon and dropped down to the mesa beyond Red Dog. "There goes Daniel's gal," said the saloon keeper as he peered out. "Seems like she's kept agon spite of old A. B. La Raquelita is not through yet. The ganado are not shipped," said a swarthy sheepherder drinking there. "Many things happen on the road." There was a sneering smile on his face. "What the, you yellow-livered woman beater, you," roared Red Dog, and pushed the man out through the door before he thought to ask him what that meant, if anything. And being quite drunk himself, Red Dog fell asleep with his head on the table, instead of riding after the dust of the Daniels girls' outfit. Camp was made 3 miles out of La Cruz, and never before had a shipment of cattle seemed so momentous to Raquel. "This is the most important shippin' Los Ranchos ever did," she grinned at Russell over the soapweed fire. "Well, the worst is over now," he assured her. "Why don't you go on into town in the car and get a good night's sleep? Nothin' will happen, and we'll be right there in the mornin', ready to start shippin' at 6. A cold, biting rain had been falling off, and on ever since they had left Red Dog one of those miserable March visitations, which even the land of sunshine must endure if there is to be grass on the range. Raquel was drenched from her waist down. Her boots had not been off for 3 days. And now she was drying them on her feet before the fire so that she would be able to get them on again after she did take them off. She hated to leave her outfit now, but she was dead for sleep. And besides, there were things for her to attend to in town. "All right, boys, I will. Tomorrow's Tuesday. We ship our cattle. They arrive Thursday. And Friday morning, April 1st and incidentally my birthday, boys. As if they didn't know it. I step into the First National Bank for a few moments, and when I come out you can celebrate." They smiled gallantly, and Russ looked enormously relieved. No one knew what the faithful cowboy had suffered during all these negotiations about cars. Raquel's apparent confidence had preserved the morale of the whole outfit, although they knew nothing of the financial drama that was being played. So La Raquelita drove off through the misting rain. Her feverish eyes concentrated on the washouts in the road ahead, for the ruts were running rivers. She did not see the horse and rider, poncho-covered, cowering behind a mesquite bush not 15 feet from where she passed. It was the dark sheepherder of Red Dog's saloon. He rode a horse branded with a large leaning H that showed up clearly for a moment when the searchlight of Raquel's car swerved sidewise as the car skidded in the mud. What was that? Raquel wondered. But as her eyes were on the road in front of her, so were her thoughts concentrated on what lay ahead, and she lurched on. At length she reached town and a paved street. How grateful was the hard little bed at El Emporio Magnifico, and the hot little room, bursting with its sheet iron stove. 8 hours later Georgie stood by Raquel's bed, shaking her to wake her up. He shook and shook. What was that? What? The steers stampeded. Wait now, let's get this straight. Last night, after I left. Oh, stop sniffling, Georgie. What's to prevent getting them back for a late shipment tonight? Nearly half the rodeo. Well, let Russ tell me himself then. Raquel sprang from bed. She was shaking with the shock of this misfortune. This was more than a cowman's luck. This was disaster. Just to miss the amount of the note. No use trying to dicker at the bank. She was dressing rapidly as these thoughts flashed through her mind. 600 head at $50 a head was $30,000. Where could she get 10,000 more? There was a knock at the door, and a fat letter was pushed beneath. Registered letter come last night for Miss Raquel Daniels, announced a hoarse voice that sounded like music to Raquel. Something had to happen. This must be it. She had almost forgotten, and that was all there was to it, Jimmy, said Raquel exultingly a week later. She had reached that point in her story of the deal, as she and Jimmy sat before a fire in the ranch sitting room. It was a week from the Sunday after Raquel's birthday. Jimmy had come over for a day. Go on, he roared. It may be all as far as you are concerned, but you haven't told me yet a word of what really happened in between. Well, when I got down to the yards, there were Jommy and Russ lookin', as if they'd lost their last friend on earth. They had 600 head of cattle ready to ship, but 600 more were out on the mesa. They figured it would take a week to get them in, scattered as they were. Someone had deliberately spooked them, of course, and only Mom here knew who that someone was. Mom had come in and was rocking with expressive contentment. You could generally tell Mom's emotions by the speed of her rocker. It seems that same night about 8 o'clock, Raquel went on, Elena came up here crying her eyes out. She'd just come back from La Balsa and didn't know we'd gone with the cattle. Wanted to know where I was, and when we were taking El Ganado down into town to the railroad. She said that Pancho was a bad hombre, and though he had threatened her, she would not keep silent anymore. Dad had always been kind to her, and we cured her little girls just a few weeks ago. Well then, she would tell everything. Pancho was not only working here at Los Ranchos, he was also working for A. B, and always told him just what Los Ranchos was going to do. It was Pancho who stampeded the cattle in order to hold things up as much as possible. And when I got ready to sell to someone else rather than the man whom A. B dealt with, and had managed to get the cars which Pancho said he didn't think I would get for a long time, Pancho got a message from A. B to keep the cattle from being shipped. He and her first cousin, the La Balsa sheepherder, brother of the half-wit we met the day of the hunt, Georgie, well, they did it. We're going to do it, she said. It was the poor, innocent half-wit who had taken the sheep over to La Balsa. They hadn't been stolen by the lion at all. Pancho had made Gabriel drive them over in the old ox cart. Remember how old Cap carried on, Georgie, at the start of the hunt, and how he wanted to chew Gabriel up. Yes, but get on and tell about the bank part. I'm coming to it. Jimmy, will you keep still a minute? Well, poor Alina. She nearly had an attack when she found we'd already gone. I tell you, I am getting to the bank part. So I told the boys to go ahead and ship what was there, because the boys at the station had orders not to hold the cars longer than 12 hours. Jami and Angel went along with and arrived in Kansas City Thursday all right. I guess even that was a disappointment to some folks, 'cause that meant $30,000, and anyone can raise 5 or 10,000 some way. But I didn't have to. Yes, some folks were sure disappointed that day. Jimmy exploded in a curdling yell of impatience, but Raquel continued, ignoring the interruption placidly. When I walked into the bank at 10:30 in the morning, April 1st, lookin' very sour, and handed out a draft on the National City Bank, New York City, for $35,000, signed by Barry C. Marvin S.R. Of Boston, there was surely some surprise. I wish you could have seen Mr. A.B. Mayer's face and Mr. Putnam looked pleased in spite of himself, though he was actually apologetic to A. B. You see, that was the idea that came to me the night Mom and I were motoring home from La Cruz. I said to myself, I'll tell Anne's father all about it. Maybe he'll advance me the money. He can't lose in the long run. Maybe, just maybe, he'll help. So I wrote him a letter right away. I didn't dare to hope for it, or scarcely think about it even. I went ahead to ship our cattle, so that whatever happened, we'd be all right. Then, when they did finally manage to break up our herd that morning, and I was trying to think there in the hotel, I just couldn't admit failure, even though it seemed to stare me in the face. Why, that wonderful letter of Mr. Marvin S. came pockin' under the door. It meant that I didn't fail Dad, and that we could let half our range rest for the next year. That even if we get another dry year, we'll have fresh pasture. And we've got the calves to put on it, and that's more than A. B has. And if this war lasts, those calves are going to be badly needed next winter. Reiki, you're a financier. I am lost in pure and simple admiration. And luck's with you, too. The market's gone up. Jimmy pointed to a place he had marked in the paper. I know. We can ship 1,000 head in another week, including the 600 strays. Russ has got all but a few of them back now. They just did us a good turn by Savin, half our shipment out for a higher price. In fact, delayin', the cars brought us $55 a head for those we did ship instead of 50, and we'll get 60 for this next bunch. Well, you owe that to A. B too, I suspect, said Jimmy. The delay in the cars, I mean. I found out that it was he who pulled the wires over the freight agent's head, without lettin' him know that it was the Daniels. Ranch he had it in for, of course. Just slippin', friends of his in ahead. I found out, too, that his El Paso bank holds a couple of notes of the agent, S. Your order for cars could just as well have gone through at any time, barring the usual delays. I imagine, for when my friend, the major, got down there the morning after you wired me, the order was forthcoming from the agent himself without any difficulty. There was a loud-mouthed fellow in a plaid overcoat in the office at the same time, blustering about something or other, but the agent just waved him aside. That miserable commission man, Raquel exclaimed. Didn't Dad warn me? Offering me $15 a head less than the market, and trying to tell me he could get me cars if I'd just close the deal right off, you know. I was pretty near ready to take his offer there for a time. Everything looked so discouraging. She made the admission shamefacedly. He thought he could put anything over on you because you were a girl, and he would just pocket the difference. He thought he had you either way. If you had agreed to sell, you would never have got your money in time to meet the note. Wonder if Pancho knew anything about all this. Jimmy turned inquiringly to Mom. Where is he? He hasn't come back. Alina doesn't know where he is. Over at La Balsa, I guess. Gettin', ready to brand all the strays and drifters from Colorado down he can lay his hands on, with that big old flying H. Ain't nobody but Pancho would be that cute to make him such a handy brand. Mom had been silent as usual, but there was nothing in the proceedings or conversation that she had missed. Had they been able to see Pancho at that moment hand, it was too bad that they would have beheld a most chagrined hombre. Leaning over a little table in a barroom in La Cruz, he was glaring angrily at the cattleman who sat opposite him. I have done all you said. Haul back the cow work 3-4 week. I stopped the sheepment. I want my money. My esposa, my wife, she no speak to me. She's good amiga to El Padron, La Padrona. She think he cannot help take her father's rancho. Me, I take what coming to me. I want my money now. The cowman shook his head imperturbably. When I get mine, you get yours. Understand, Sabe? I got nothing out of this. The deal's off. The hombre who was to pay both you and me on the cattle deal didn't pull it off, though I fixed the cars for the... And he swore an ugly oath. The sale didn't go through. He didn't get any commission, see? And you let that gal ship half anyway. What you kickin' about anyway? You got a ranch to work, ain't you? A place to start you a herd. What's the matter with the Flying H, that little private brand yon? And with a laugh and an oath that but faintly expressed his disgust at the situation, A. B waved Esquibel off and rose from the table. It seemed that Raquel and Jimmy, too, had come to a time of settlement about the question of Lois. Jimmy had not mentioned Raquel's letter, but now, as they sat alone once more before the fire, while Mom got supper and the boys were out at the chores, Jimmy told her that he had heard from his uncle. It was while he was in Kansas, he said. His uncle had missed him in El Paso anyway. They had been up in Colorado, but found it too cold there. They were leaving for California and would see him on the way back. It was very possible that they might go on to the Orient. It was plain that Jimmy was keenly disappointed to have missed his uncle and Lois, and also to learn that she had failed him and had been unkind to Raquel. It worried him, too, this uncertainty as to their plans. It was not a bit like his uncle, he said. But it was like Lois. Raquel could not help thinking. Chapter 11, The Wild Horse. Suddenly, one day they were in the midst of spring. It was impossible to believe that there had been such a blizzard only 6 weeks before. The sun shone with a desperate heat for early April. The arroyos dried up. The open range was calling. Now the time had come, Raquel decided, to make that trip over into the reaches of the upper Picos, where a bunch of wild horses had been running free for several years. These horses had straggled down from Montana and Wyoming, it was said, through Colorado and New Mexico, and had multiplied on the unfenced stretches of Texas range. Ole Hosfoot had reported that a band of fine horse stock, partly Mustang, was going to waste over there. The wild horses used up range that was needed for beef stock, and the hand of the cattleman was set against them. It was almost impossible to capture them, and if a stockman did take the trouble, what could he do with them? They brought less than a cow at the stockyards, and you couldn't sell an unbroke Mustang for anything. And so many of these fine, free animals ended with a bullet between the eyes. Yet there they were, ready to be gentled into prize ponies for anyone who would take the trouble. It would be an undertaking thoroughly to Raquel's liking, to capture a few of the swift, untamed creatures. "I'm going over there and get me a horse, Mom. We'll need more horses for the roundup, and there's as good stock built up by wild living as any bred cow horse I know today. Mrs." Daniel sighed. "Does seem like you're never satisfied unless you get a new piece of wild, buckin, horseflesh under you, Raquel." It was as near a reproof as she had ever come. But she said no more when she saw them getting ready. "If I remember the lay of that country over there," Raquel told Russell, "there are at least 2 canyons where you could close the end and corral a few animals anyway. If it takes over a week, we'll not linger. But I have my heart set on getting a horse from off the plains with a little raw Mustang in him, a little Arab stallion, and some native blood-a real wild horse." Jami, Georgie, and Angel, who was a good roper, were to go. Jami and Angel rode, but Raquel and Georgie took the car as far as the Shandy Ranch, 60 miles from the Lazy L. There they left it under a shed, while they rode out to look over the country on horses borrowed from their ranch neighbors. Old Shandy, a man not more than 40 who looked 60, rode with them, leading the way towards the distant pastures where the wild herd ran. They stood upon the crest of a slope, looking away over rolling distances bound to the north and the east by low-lying foothills. The range was magnificent with young grandma grass and thick patches of bunch grass. Behind a clump of Spanish dagger, where the soil was still soft from the recently melted snow, was the print of a horse's unshod hoof. Further along, they came across a hoof print larger for a wild horse than any they had ever seen. Both Raquel and Georgie were delighted. But it was growing dark, too late for any more land looking that day, so they turned back to Shandy's, where they were to put up. Shandy and his old woman, really old, alas, at 38, and childless, were so excited with the unusual experience of having company that they talked, no doubt, more than they had in 6 months. Raquel had brought provisions in the car, and over Mrs. Shandy's protests insisted on bringing them in. They were not going to eat the Shandys out of house and home without warning that way. She helped Mrs. Shandy fry the bacon and peel potatoes, while they set beans to soaking for the next day. There was a sack of cornmeal, one of dried peaches, and a case of condensed milk, for the Shandys, like most ranch folk, kept no milk cattle. They ate hearty dinners at 5, and by 8 were all stowed away, too sleepy to talk in their hard beds anchored under the equally hard comforters provided by Mrs. Shandy and the Navajo rugs which Raquel had packed in the car. Raquel and Georgie slept beside each other in a tiny room off the kitchen, which was living room, bedroom, and dining room. In adjoining rooms were Jami and Angel, who had arrived just in time for supper. The doors were all left open to get the heat from the kitchen, and soon a variety of snores could be heard. Raquel giggled and stuffed the cast-iron quilt into her upturned and defenseless ear. She fell asleep to a smothered din of snores from within the house, and the yap-yapping of coyotes and the long howl of a lobo outside on the mesa. The day broke with glorious weather. In a sky of turquoise, blue great cumulus clouds piled. A soft wind blew off the rolling prairie, where already tall grasses swayed to the base of tawny foothills. Upon a hummock, a scouting party sat motionless in their saddles, looking down towards the northwest. That's no horse Jami. It's a charred Tula, and right next it is a white-faced heifer. Raquel was positive. "'Scuse me, ma'am, but that's a dark pomedy and a bunch o' daisies." Jami grinned with superior wisdom and handed Raquel his field glass. Even the expert range rider can be deceived at a distance of 3 miles. Not a sign of wild horses had been seen, and after 2 days of beautiful, clear whether the horse hunters were none the richer. But luck was coming on the heels of the wind. Across the mesa top came Angel and Georgie at a dead run, and in a few minutes pulled up beside Raquel and Jami. "Sighted," burst out Georgie. "Foller me." He wheeled and was off, pursued by racing centaurs. Up they came behind a grassy hill, and hardly had their heads topped the summit when a thunder of hoofs arose, a wind as of a cattle stampede, and almost over their toes a bunch of horses went hightailing, burning the wind with their arrogance and joy. The leader was a great roan stallion, the herd mainly young horses, a bunch of mares, and half a dozen 2-year-old colts. Beside these, there ran free as though riding herd upon its companions, a milk and sorrel pinto that flashed before Raquel like a painted tiger lily. The sight of it left her breathless. Not until the whirlwind had faded away in the distance did they stir or speak. "There's my horse." "Oh, I want him." Raquel scarcely spoke above a whisper. "Well, I guess we'll just have to slip a rope over his head for you, Raquel," promised Jami with a fine air of assurance. "I aim to get me that slick brown Mustang. I always wanted one, and I might as well take my Bronco bustin' now, 'cause after I hit 30 I'll be put out the run-in anyways." Raquel turned on the boys earnestly. "Boys, we've got 2 good ropers here, Jami and Angel, and we ought to get us a few new ponies from this bunch. But I don't need to tell you let's have no hard throwin', please. Don't break down any horse. Let's have 'em sound of wind and limb, or not at all. If there any killers amongst 'em, leave 'em alone. We aren't training for the state rodeo, and we've got plenty of broncs at home that you can scratch to your heart's content right in the home corral. Remember Snaky and Diablo. And the roundup will furnish enough fightin', steers to satisfy even Jami. And say, Angel, let's see that rope of yours do its stuff." Then began the real work. Deploying off in twos, they gained by different routes the mouth of the North Canyon, where foothills enclosed an amphitheater of waving range. At the end was a natural corral, a rock-bound prison, and across the narrowest part of this, the boys built a pole stockade with a narrow opening. Leading up to this gate was a runway, along the top and bottom of which they strung barbed wire. Just outside the stockade, they put up a saddling pen. It took the entire day to finish, and while the boys were working with Mr. Shandy's help. Raquel and Georgie rode herd back and forth about 2 miles from the mouth of the canyon to keep off any approach of the wild horses at this point. From a high rock, Raquel saw down in a coulee a bunch of mares herded together, and 2 tiny colts, not more than 2 or 3 days old, basking in the hot sun. They wobbled and frisked on their uncertain legs, perfect little mustangs. They seemed to grow stronger every minute as they soaked up the sunshine. As the sun began at length to sink, the lord of the herd came thundering up to pick up his mare, and they all went off together towards the foothills, but fortunately not towards the box canyon which Raquel had picked out to corral them in. It seemed to Raquel that she could not wait for morning, and that she tossed and turned for hours that night, dreaming of the painted mustang, before sleep came. As a matter of fact, she slept almost at once, and the dreams all took place in the few restless moments, while sounds from adjoining rooms were waking her up. Once again they were out on the plains, searching for a glimpse of the wild horse and his herd. It was noon before Raquel got so much as a sign of their dust, way over towards the east. But they were not able to get within a mile of the herd that way. Whenever one of them came up around a slope or rock, the band was already scattered or had shifted to some spot out of sight. Yet they kept always to windward of those keen nostrils. They agreed that they could put in 2 more days waiting. But luck was with them in the morning. Warm and still, without any wind to carry scent or sound to quivering noses and pointing ears, the very air favored their purpose. There they were, the spirited creatures, feeding in that hollow. And at a signal 5 cowponies flashed over the rim and drew a flying cordon about the startled and almost instantly speeding band. The colts ran with frantic and manful leaps alongside their mothers, but the pace was too great, and both were left behind in a few moments. The mares whinnied despairingly, broke gait, faltering, to be nipped back into line by sharp teeth on flank and shoulder. One, however, wheeled about and tore back after her baby, and the race passed on. With the whole prairie to circle in, it was almost too good to be true that the dark stallion should make for the box canyon. But the wise old boy may know a trail out, Raquel speculated as she pressed her pony closer upon the western flank. Jami had ridden so close that he was swinging his rope over a 3-year-old. There it circled the mustang's outthrust chest. The stocky, well-trained cowhorse that Jami rode was bracing himself for a full stop, as if he were going to throw a steer. But Jami spurred him on and pulled back slowly, and surely till the astonished 3-year-old was compelled to drop behind while his wild fellows disappeared ahead. Raquel, who was gaining on the race, scarcely took her eyes from the milky, red-spotted flank of the pinto. As she drew in nearer the running horses, she could see him plainly. The beautiful throat was swelling, the wild head up, the long, plumy tail raised in defiant flight and streaming on the wind of his speed. "You beauty," she sang to herself. "Oh, if I can get you, I'll make you love me." They were at the canyon's mouth. There was no drawing back now. The chief stallion tore straight ahead. Jami was trying to cut out the stragglers, a 2-year-old filly, an old mare, a year-old colt that they would not want. And finally he succeeded in riding between them and the main group, driving them off down the canyon again. It was almost too simple. The wild horse, unlearned in the ways of man, made for his close refuge, and pressed towards the long runway, saw no other way of escape. He swerved into the trap. Not until the sides of the chute touched his flank did the fleeing leader show terror. He stopped amidst flying clods of earth, trembling violently. His magnificent speed had failed him. He would fight. Rearing on his hind feet, he pawed at the barrier of saplings. He used his hoofs like hands, wrenching and pulling with terrible strength and dexterity at the poles that would not break. Then suddenly he leaped almost straight up into the air, and clear of them only to feel a hot, stinging circlet angel's Rita, close about his throat. The pinto, meanwhile, had raced straight ahead, followed by 3 of the band. The gate had been quickly closed, and the wild horses raced madly round the corral. Outside, there were a few moments of terrible danger, as the enraged stallion rose in the air to fight this thing around his neck, and this creature pulling at him. As the black horse rose over him with murderous hoofs flaying the air, Angel abandoned his Rita and, pulling his pony up almost over backward, beat a swift retreat and saved both pony and himself by a hair's breadth, while Georgie, with unexpected presence of mind, laid a stinging lash along the wild horse's flank. The big stallion turned and thundered his way back down the canyon. It was all over in a moment. Raquel, meanwhile, rode along the corral rail, panting with the race and the excitement. The pinto would not be roped. Again and again her cleverly flung Rita hovered, to be fought aside, bit at and writhed from. Neither Angel nor Jami, who came up shortly with his prize, could capture the milk and sorrel horse. But Angel roped and threw a pretty little mare that had been caught in the runway, and within an hour had her saddled and bridled. He rode her at once up and down the canyon. "I'll tell you, boys, just leave me here. Leave me alone with the pinto. I can handle him, alone, and bring him back. Just let me try it," Raquel pleaded. And so, unwillingly enough, the boys returned to the Shandy Ranch, and Raquel stayed behind with the pinto. For an hour after the sound of the departing party had died away, Raquel sat quietly beside the corral fence. Then she began to move along the side, speaking gently to the pony she rode so that the watchful creature quivering over against the rock wall would grow accustomed to the sound of her voice. She came and went, while the wild mustang watched her from the far end of the trap corral. She threw grass over the fencing and waited. She spoke to the pinto and waited. And finally, she rode her pony through the runway and into the corral. The little wild horse stood perfectly still. He was curious, but he would not let them come near him, and as the strange creature drew closer, he whirled about only to find that suddenly a whirring thing settled over his head. Though he fought desperately and shied and wheeled to the other side of the enclosure, and rose up in many straight-legged, round-backed buckings, it remained there. When his fear and his fury were spent a bit, he heard the voice of the creature again. There was something in it that arrested him. His trembling stopped. But as he felt the rope pulling on his neck, he fought again furiously, and rose up to tear it from him with his 4 feet. There was danger in his eye. But the rope pulled him sharply down, a swift twirl round a snubbing post, and he found that in spite of running, charging, plunging, biting, he was still held by the thing round his neck. It took an hour to learn this. The soft-voiced creature spoke gently to him from time to time whenever he stood still. She had dismounted and stood not far away. There was danger in that contest between the girl and the horse. But if there had not been something of a conquest, the pinto would not have meant so much to Raquel. Finally, although he trembled, he stood still when she came near. She laid a hand on the rope and drew it taut, while the other crept up towards his velvet muzzle. Over and over the girl's fingers crept up the rope, and the sun was sinking when at last her soft palm came to rest over his spotted nose. The wild nostrils widened. A great exhalation of fear was released, but Raquel's reassuring touch, gentle as a breeze, remained. Her hand crept to his neck, patted the sturdy shoulder. Dusk was falling when Raquel rode the wild horse up to the very door of the shandy adobe. His flanks were wet, yet Raquel wore no spur and guided her mount with a rope bridle. "I did not even need the bit," she said at once. "Custer's pony is back there tied in the canyon corral. Will you ride over and bring him back for me, Jami?" She turned the pinto into a walled corral, staking him with a 12-foot rope. She caressed his nose as she said good night. He drew back, but submitted with a curious widening of the eyes. He had had a rope about his head, had carried a weight on his back, but now he did not want to fight this creature who had conquered him. Something of that trust, which the horse can feel for man, had entered his free, wild heart. It was 3 days later that Raquel rode into the home corral on her milk and sorrel steed. They had spent one night on the open meadow, one at La Raquelita, making about 20 miles a day. With a thrill of exultation, Raquel slipped from the pinto's back. "You'll have your own corral, Querido, never fear." She spoke softly into his creamy ear while she deftly loosed the cinches, unsaddled, and set saddle and blanket on the ground behind the newly gentled animal. The neck rope was thrown to the ground, so the pinto should learn that where it rested, he remained. Raquel moved towards the gate. The horse's intelligent eyes followed this new being who so compelled his obedience and his devotion. He ran a few steps after her, but the gate brushed his breast, and he drew back with a look of the frenzy he was to forget. Then the quiet voice which already affected him so, and which he was to learn so to love, stopped the quick beating of his heart. "Adios, compadre. We'll have many a fine time together, little paintbrush." "That is your name." Mom was at the kitchen door, her eyes crinkled with pleasure. "So you got you a little pinto, honey. Always did want one more'n any color horseflesh, didn't you?" And there was much talk round the table of the beauties and powers of this remarkable Mustang, and his gaits. "Why, he'll trot like a lobo and stretch out like a deer, and he can bound with the antelope. I tell you folks, the paintbrush has copied every runnin' creature, and he'll do it all for me when I have won him entirely." Chapter 12, Druth. "That makes 300, Russ," counted Raquel, while a wriggling leggy calf, bawing frantically for its mother, was caught in the squeezer as it tried to slip through the cattle chute. Russ pulled the calf out, and in a moment had the little white face on its side in the corral. There was a smell of singeing hair, an enraged moan from the waiting mother cow, and as her baby struggled to its feet, a little lazy L branded on its flank, she charged wildly. Everybody scattered, and Georgie got under the corral fence just in time to escape a competent pair of horns. The calf looked wildly about, discovered its mother charging the world, and with a ball buted into her side. Immediately, her frenzy disappeared from the range mother. She became quiet and peaceful and loving, and began vigorously to lick her son into shape, while he healed his hurts with nourishment. "Oh, you old cow mother, you. That's just the way I feel, peaceful and lovin'." Raquel grinned at Russell. It was a glorious day, the 1st of May, although the sun was too hot for 8 o'clock in the morning. "Do you know, Russ, the Lazy L cleared just $65,000 on that bunch of cattle we shipped 2 weeks ago. The market raised from $50 to $65 a head and is still going up. If we'd sent them all off at first, we'd have lost, let's see, just $9,000. All of that's gone into Liberty bonds now. We've paid Mr. Marvin back, with interest, and the rest is in the bank for operatin expenses. But the question is, where are we going to get more cattle for the government? After this next bunch, we can't ship anything but veal until September, I don't know, ma'am. Cattle is gettin' scarcer and scarcer already with this war. And if we don't get some rain, what cattle we got left won't be fit to put on ice. The roundup, which was nearly complete, had totaled Lowe's ranchos, already some 2,500 calves. As a number of the great pastures of Lowe's ranchos were fenced, the cattle were being branded in lots. The roundup proper, which takes place once a year and for one purpose only, that of branding all cattle, is a thing of the open range, where there are no fences, and cattle must be rounded up for 50 miles. There is much riding. A big outfit is necessary, and it takes longer than when it can be done by pastures. In the old days, Dad would be out on the range for 5 and 6 weeks at a time, and cattle from way up in Colorado would have to be cut out of his herd. Drifters that had traveled a couple of 100 miles. Russ's gloomy prediction almost came true during the hot weeks that followed. Hot weeks without so much as a tiny cloudlet appearing in that matchless blue of sky. The young grass that had sprung up from the moisture of the rain on the night when they had driven their first shipment of cattle down into town had already shriveled. The mesas that in other years had been flowered meadows, knee-deep in grandma grass, were now one with the desert, yellow and dry, except for the tender green of the mesquite. Raquel stood at the edge of the Alamo Grove, looking out over the desert. Above her head, the young leaves of the alamos were shiny and green. Raquel looked up to them admiringly. You all just go on diggin' for water till you get it, don't you, old trees? I wonder how deep those great old roots of yours go. The same with that mesquite out yonder. The most of that little bush is down underground, nossin', maybe 40 feet to keep those pretty little leaves green like that. I wish grass could help itself that way. She spoke mournfully, for in the past 2 weeks the last of the small water holes had disappeared, and the big reservoirs were low. Not a breath of wind, strong enough to turn the windmill, had there been in weeks. And now the little shiny leaves overhead hung motionless. Jami and Georgie had gone out to drive up the straggling cattle that were coming in for water. Raquel's forethought in regard to the tank in the grove had proved wise, for quite a pool had survived in the deep shade of the trees. Now, as she watched, a straggling line of cattle came up the slight incline that set the grove off from the desert, and broke clumsily into a run as they saw the water they had been smelling so long. They plunged down into it, burying heads and shoulders in its heavenly wetness. One old cow was so exhausted that she could not rise from her knees and would have drowned on the spot if Raquel had not shouted for help to pull her out. That afternoon Raquel rode over south to a windmill, now idle but still dripping a few drops that in the course of hours would fill a small trough. Here stood a line of patient cows, licking the drops as fast as they fell. This had always been one of the best wells. Raquel was miserable as she saw the thirst-tormented creatures waiting there so patiently. Formerly, there had been back of the shack near the windmill a small pipeline leading down from one of those tiny springs in a canyoncito above. Remembering this, Raquel tore up to the spot. She was riding the pinto, who had become her inseparable companion, and who followed at her heels the moment she dismounted. Rummaging under the dead grass and leaves, she soon found the end of the pipe, but not a drop oozed from its dust-clogged mouth. It was choked, that was clear. Climbing up above, Raquel found that under a shelving rock there was moisture. Her groping fingers felt water in the deep crevice, unbelievably cool in its natural rock filter. It took but a long piece of baling wire and a few minutes to clean the pipe, to join it with another length that reached crookedly down to the trough, and to watch the tiny stream trickle forth to be sucked into thirsty, heat-caked muzzles before it fell. While she waited, there was a continual straggling procession of cattle coming up for water. And now one of those piteous tragedies of the cow country passed before Raquel's eyes. A drought-crazed cow came weaving towards the trough. 10 feet away, she stopped, lifted her nose to sniff that scent of water. Then, stumbling a few steps, she buried her muzzle in the dust, lapping it feebly, and fell over dead. It was impossible to keep someone at each trough all the time. Raquel reflected sadly as she rode homeward. Her depression was not only because of the suffering, but because it meant terrific loss to the cattle country. And it meant that the government's demand for beef could not be met. As she rode, Raquel's eyes traveled anxiously over the plains in search of wandering stock. What cattle she saw were making toward water holes, some of them with stumbling calves at their udders, trying to moisten their baby mouths as they followed along. The little pipeline would take care of them, Raquel reflected gratefully, until the boys could bring them into the home corral. Not more than a mile from the house, she came across a big she-mule, tenderly nuzzling a baby burrito that butted feebly and in vain for its dinner against this barren foster mother. "So you stole you a baby, you poor old childless thing, you." Raquel dismounted and picked up the fuzzy, rabbit-eared little bundle, weak with hunger. She laid it across her saddle, much to the pinto's distaste. "Hey there, paintbrush, slow there, boy." "It's all right." She vaulted quickly into the saddle and trotted away with the burrito in her arms and the bereaved kidnapper following close behind. "Any of you boys see this baby's mother?" Arrived at the home corral, Raquel lifted the woolly little creature that looked like nothing so much as a giant jackrabbit into Georgie's arms, and he bore it off to the house to give it warm milk. As Raquel stepped into the kitchen, Mom handed her a letter from Dad. He was proud of the way she had handled the loan. "And do your best, my girl, to save every head of beef this summer. These soldier boys have greater need of meat now than they're ever likely to have again." June was drawing to a close, a June in which roses had little part, and only the hardiest of flowers bloomed in Mom's patio. "Mother Daniels, things were serious when Raquel spoke so. I don't believe we could ship more than 800 lean, very lean, feeders off this range if we tried. So I have a plan. Tell you when I get back," and she flung off to Red Dog in the car. "Here comes that Daniels gal," drawled Red Dog, lounging in his doorway. "I see her in town t'other day." He bit off a chew of tobacco and looked in at A. B, who leaned against the bar. A. B apparently did not hear. She seemed to have a lot o' business in the bank, deposit in her profits and the like. Red Dog thoroughly enjoyed making this communication and was no whit disconcerted that it was received in silence. "I hear she's going across the border after stock next." Still no effect. "You all don't seem to have such a lot of business over towards La Balsa these days as a while back. Ain't you on good terms with Esquibel no more?" "I thought he was runnin' La Balsa." A steely gaze bore into Red Dog's eyes. "Some folks don't know when to mind their own business," remarked A. B with dangerous softness. "Can't seem to sense when talkin'. Ain't healthy, but as long as you're so conversational today, you might just add what cattle the Daniels gal aims to buy." "Oh, as to that, I don't know nothin' for sure," replied Red Dog unperturbed. "All I know is I heard old Don Justino Chav say that she was the only person could afford to bring over a bunch o' cattle from Sonora that his primo's holdin' down there." "That's so," replied the cowman. "Is that so? Now what in TH, name o the Gila monster did I go and tell him that for? Regretted Red Dog as he watched A. B swing into his car and move off towards town without so much as a backward glance. I'll get myself into trouble yet braggin' about that little gal. Down in town, the boss of the Lazy L was just making a request that left the good mister Putney aghast. But 5,000 in currency, my dear child. Money is meant to be kept in banks. Why endanger yourself by taking that much cash with you? Raquel waved aside his qualms with such effect that within 15 minutes, she strode out the door of the main bank of La Cruz with the amount she wanted in bills and gold, stowed away in a money belt about her slender waist. Nothing but cash talked in Mexico, she had always heard Dad say. And so it came about that Raquel, with Georgia's first aid, made ready to set out for the Mexican border on a shimmering, blinding July day. They would ride into town. From there, they would ship their horses to the border, riding in the box cars with them, for Raquel had determined to take the Pinto with her. There might be a lot of riding, she explained. But the truth was she didn't want Paintbrush to be separated from her, to forget her and all she had taught him. We'll be back inside 2 or 3 weeks at the most, so don't you fret, Mother Honey. I had it straight from Don Justino, who has just come up, that his cousin has several thousand head waiting there at his rancho just across the frontera. Don Justino promised him to find purchasers as soon as he got here. He says that everything is quiet along the border now, and there'll be no trouble. It's only the rich refugees who are worried. Gold, American money, is the only thing that counts in Mexico, and I'll be back with a herd if they're as Don Justino says. When you get my wire, have the boys meet us at the border.